and we're getting closer to summer. We only have 2 more lectures, so we have today and then in a couple of weeks. This actually you should already put in your calendars. We have actually the last Games Now lecture that's combined to the Aalto in the Game recruitment event in a couple of weeks. So the lecture will be at the normal time, but you'll also have a chance to come earlier to actually see all this other stuff going on here. There's going to be demos of student games, and there's going to be companies who are recruiting. So welcome also then. But let's go to today's topic. So we have Graham McAllister coming to talk today about player research. And as you can see, the name of the talk, Making Better Games Consistently. That's of course something we all want to do. We'll today have the point of view of player research to that. So excited to have you here.
Thanks, Mika.
Welcome.
Okay, thank you. It's interesting to hear you say that summer is coming. I said to Mika, I said to Mika, it's very cold here, and he said, no, this is good. So I'm quite surprised that this is warm. Anyway, firstly, an apology. I have a cold that I brought with me from the UK and GDC. It came from America originally, I'm sure. So I may stop it a few times. Apologies. So hello, thanks for turning up and coming along. My name's Graham, and I run a company called Player Research in the UK. And what we do is try and make games better. So we don't make games ourselves, but we work for the video game industry. I'll show you who we work for in a second. We work on about 50 or 60 games a year. They're mostly mobile, free to play, I would say, about 60 or 70%. The other 30% are console, PC, handheld, premium games, that sort of thing. So it's that sort of split. And we work for the very biggest players, for example, King or Natural Motion, down to the very, very smallest of indie developers, sometimes a single person or 2-man teams. So it's a very wide spectrum. We work for all platforms for a very wide variety of games. But what I'm going to show you today applies to all games, every single game, including your game. There's things you can do that will vastly increase your chances of making your game successful, whatever successful means to you. Success comes in different forms, I know. So these are some of the people that we work for. Just to give you an idea of who uses this thing that I'm about to talk about today, who uses this process to make their game better. No doubt you've played some of these games or games from these companies. In terms of the mobile games that we've worked on, you may have played some of them too. For example, maybe Brothers, published by 505, or Sonic. Freeblade, which was on the App Store recently, on the Apple keynote event, it was one of the games featured. CSR, here and here. So you may have played some of these games. In fact, all games we've worked on, every single one, on release has been featured on the Apple App Store, on the front page. So new and noteworthy, top grossing, editor's choice. But I have to be clear, it's not just due to us, it's due to a combination of things. Firstly, the people that we work for, the people who find us, and then hopefully the process we go through to make their game better. And that's the thing I'm going to tell you about today. So what is the things you can do that helps get these games that maybe were good to be great? How do you polish games so that the players love them? So as you probably realize, making games has got more difficult. And it's not actually always the games themselves, the process of making a game that's got more difficult. What has got a lot more difficult is getting your game discovered. So even if you do make a great game, how do people find out about it? There are different figures quoted. For example, in the App Store, there's 500 games a day being released. Some people report different numbers, but it's in the hundreds, somewhere from 300 to 500. That's not apps, that's games specifically. On Google's Play Store, it's around 250. So if you release a game onto those stores today, there are hundreds of other people on that exact same day who you're competing against. And that's not counting all the people that week or that month. So it's a really difficult, to get noticed, basically. How do you do that? So that's one of the problems, just. So how do you make a great game? There are various things we'll talk about today. But let's start with a very simple one. What do you need? If you ask game developers, you'll get different answers. By the way, if you have any different ideas, you can put your hand up or shout out. But let's start with the basic stuff. Some people say, for example, well, all we need is experienced developers. Maybe. Or maybe we just need good ideas. Maybe. Or funding. You need funding to make your game as well. So a combination of these three things, people may say, well, if I had really experienced people and I've got great ideas and someone's going to give me money to make that game, is that not everything I need? Is that not enough to help me make something successful? Well, there are a few problems with this. Let's look at some of them. Experienced staff. There are lots of problems with the word experienced. It turns out, for example, that even if you are experienced, there is no data to suggest the more experienced you are, the better you are. In fact, has anyone played a game from an experienced developer that was rubbish? Well, you're all so shy. I bet you have. So how does that happen? Yeah, a few hands go up. How come experienced people are making bad games? Obviously, it's not true that all you need is experience, because all the evidence shows that's not the case. What about good ideas? Well, again, you're back to this problem. If you've got experience, how do you know necessarily that your ideas are good? Do ideas come from just being experienced? Again, the data would say no, because you're people who have made many games, and yet they can still have bad ideas. So how do you validate this? How do you know when your ideas are good or not? And what about getting funding? If you go and ask a developer or a VC or a publisher for €1 million and say, I've got a great idea, can I have €1 million, please? Actually, it's getting more difficult to get money from a VC or a publisher. And the reason is that they have very little confidence that they're going to get their money back. The risk is too great. There are too many people who fail to make a hit game. And now the people who used to give money out are saying, well, it's so risky, I will only give it to those who I think are most likely to make it. So what does that mean? We'll be discussing that later. What does it mean? How do you increase your chances of getting the funders to release money to you? So all these problems are related to a certain extent. But what if there was a way to address all of these problems, every single one? For example, what about the issue of experienced people? What if there was something that could improve your team members as you went along? So you got better at being a game designer. How do you get better at being a game designer? Even asking that question. What do you need to be better at your job? Better team communication. When we work with studios, one of the biggest issues we see is that the bigger the studio gets, they're actually worse at communicating within themselves. And even among small teams, when you ask different people individually, what game are you making? They give you different answers. So how does that happen? Why don't they all know what game they are making? It sounds obvious. So this is the problem. Imagine there was something that would fix that the whole team knew what game they were making and they were getting better at their job. What about game ideas? Again, what if there was something that allowed you to be more creative, got you to market faster, and resulted in better games? Is it possible to do that? Can something do all three of those? And what about the funders, the people who give you money to make your game? Is there something that would satisfy them, that would make them think, okay, this team have less risk than everyone else. They're doing something that is better, is less risky. But I think they will also make more money. So I am much more likely to get my money back. They are taking less risk, and they're more likely to offer an increase in revenues. And I've only highlighted one word in this page. Consistently. How many teams do you know who have made one game, either through luck or skill, again, we could debate that, but failed to do it a second time? Or their second game was not as good. So in other words, they had a hit, but either they didn't know how they did it, or it was just some factor of luck, such as timing, which is outside your control, and they couldn't do it again. But what if you could repeat a hit game every single time? Is that a crazy thing to wish for? Or can you actually do it? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today, because there is something that offers all of these things. And this is the thing that we do for the game industry. And what I'm hoping is you can take away some of these things to apply to your own game. Maybe not them all, I don't know. But even if you can take away some of them, I think you'll be vastly increasing your chances of creating a hit game. So what we do for the game industry is a player research process. We put games through a certain pipeline that does all of those things on the left. It makes the teams more skillful because they're learning faster. It helps you create better ideas. You take more risks. And the reason you take more risks is because the process will catch your good ideas and it will dismiss your bad ideas. But either way, it identifies them. And finally, you should be making more money as a result of this. And at the end of the talk, I'll show you some examples of companies that have made more money by doing this exact process. So it sounds too good to be true. Hang on, there's something that lets me be more creative, faster time to market, helps my team communicate, helps me get funding, helps me make more money, and it helps me do it every single time. Wow, that's crazy, right? It's just not true. Well, actually, it turns out it's already been done for a long time, and you've already seen their films. Anybody watched a Pixar film? I'm betting most of you have watched a Pixar film. This is Ed Catmull, who is one of the co-founders of Pixar. And Ed Catmull was a computer scientist. He was an academic, in fact. And he said, before he started Pixar, okay, I'm going to start a computer animation company. His PhD was in computer animation. And he said, if I'm going to start a computer animation company, I want it to be a success. But there was nothing else quite like them. So he took one idea from academia and applied it to business. And his one single idea that he took from academia and brought into business was peer review. And peer review is basically getting your colleagues or other experts to evaluate your work at all stages of development, at every single stage. Another expert is evaluating your work to tell you if it's good or not. And if it's good, they will tell you it's good. But if it's bad, they will tell you exactly why it's bad. And if you do this, you will create successful titles. And by the way, any academic paper is built on peer review. It's published because it's got through a certain process that says this is novel, it contributes something new to the world, and it's been done accurately. And that's what academia terms good. We could talk a long time about that, but not today. But anyway, he took this process of peer review and applied it to the making of computer animation. If you haven't read Creativity Inc., even as a game designer or game developers, you definitely should. So what was the outcome? One more step. When you read that book, Creativity Inc., Pixar is built on two core principles. And I would argue game design is also built on two core principles. Principle number one basically says, for the movies, story is king. For us as game developers, it's player experience. That's all we care about. What are you making, and how does it make the player feel? That's what you spend your time thinking about. That's what you spend your time developing. What player experience am I crafting, and how will I make the player feel? The player does not care what computer language you use to make your game. They do not care what shader you used. They do not care about the nuts and bolts of how the game is made. What they care about a lot is how it makes them feel. Why should someone talk about your game and not the other million games out there? That's what you're making, and that's what you stay awake at night thinking about, the feeling the player will have. And that's exactly what Pixar do as well. None of us know how Pixar make their movies. Well, actually, some of you may do. You may know the technology, but when you watch those films, you do not care how RenderMan works. You just think, wow, I have cried within the first 10 minutes of watching Up. Has anyone cried within the first 10 minutes of watching Up? Yes, of course you have. Amazing, right? Amazing. Nobody thought about the technology that was used. It was just the emotion. That's number one. That's the principle that Pixar is built on. What story are we telling? And as game designers, it's very, very similar for us. What has the player experienced? You would not believe how many times we have asked a client who's making a game, what should the player do in the first 5 minutes of your game? And they have said, I don't know. Wow, you're making this game, right? You're designing the experience, the player to feel something, and you have no idea? If they were in the movie industry, that just wouldn't work. They would tell you exactly how you're meant to feel. Yes, we know things can change and there's different styles of games, but you know how you would like the player to feel, and you know what they should be doing to feel that experience. Anyway, the second principle is Pixar's process. And what they're saying is, to get to number one, to get to that feeling, that experience, we have to trust the process. Because it's the process that's going to get us there. It is not luck. It's not hiring smart people. Look at all the things they could have said for number two. Hire the best animators. Hire the best storytellers. Hire the best programmers. They didn't mention any of those things for number two. None of it. It was a process. Because it's the process that binds them all together. The technology, the creative talent, the passion. That's what binds them all together. Isn't that interesting? Two principles. We're going to tell you a good story, and our process is going to help you get there, help us get there. The outcome of that was that Pixar has made 14 movies. I think it's maybe 15 since I wrote this. 10 original IPs. Isn't that amazing? Not just sequels, 10 of them are original. Every single one has been successful. The revenues on average, 3 to 10 times the cost of development, every single time. And two of them have at least 100, well, two of them have 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. So critics love it, viewers love it, and they've done it consistently every single time. It's an amazing record. I don't think anyone else has achieved quite this. And go back to their two principles. We're going to tell you a good story, and our process is going to get you there, get us there. So that's what I'm going to tell you about today, is how we do the process for the game development, for the game developers that we work for. And by the way, it's very similar to Pixar, and it's unsurprising because I also took the process from academia. I was an academic in the UK. I was very familiar with peer review. It's got good things and bad things. But we lifted the idea of peer review and we translated it into the game development industry. The reason was, even as a gamer, I was playing games that were okay, but they could definitely be better. And I don't mean subjectively better in terms of we all like different things. A lot of these things were objective. They were usability related, just game designers making bad choices that didn't have to be there. And they should have been caught during the process. But they weren't. They had made it to release. And that's strange, because that pinpoints a problem in how you make games. If these bad ideas have got it to the very, very end and into the player's hands, and no one checked it, then you need to be thinking how you make games. Let's look at today. Let's look at free-to-play in particular, because it's got its own set of challenges. Most of the things I'll be talking about today, in fact nearly all, apply to premium games or free-to-play. But I'll look at free-to-play first. So let's look at what you hope will happen. User acquisition. This is a discoverability problem as well, I guess. But somehow you've made a game and you've got it on the App Store or the Google Play Store. That's great. Well done. I'm very pleased for you. Your game is released. Awesome. What are you hoping will happen? Well, what you're hoping is, once the player downloads the game, they go into this loop of engagement and retention. So the player downloads it, they open your game, they play it, they quit. A few days later, they open it again, they play it. And after a period of time, they grow to love it. And if enough time passes, and if your game is good enough, then that player will give you some money. Now, that's what we all hope for. That's the free-to-play world. And what you're hoping for is that the cost of acquisition, the cost per acquisition, is less than the lifetime value. In other words, the cost that you paid to get the player to download your game, let's go back a bit, is maybe $1, but what you're hoping is that player gives you $10 or $5. Anyway, more. So I paid $1 for them to get them to download my game, but in return they give me $5. I'm making money, I am a successful game developer. That's great. Very good. So, as you probably realize, that rarely happens. The vast majority of free-to-play games, in fact, will probably not make money. So what will happen is, yes, the player will download the game, they go through this loop, but instead of going up and paying you, what they decide is, no, there is nothing here worth paying for. Somehow in the game design, or something about it, that I have decided I will not give this person any money. I'm guessing you don't want that, probably, I'd imagine. So let's look at this loop, right? Here's the interesting part. Here's where the player was lost. And going around this loop from engagement to retention, the player then has a choice to give you money or to delete your app from their phone. So what are the possible reasons why that would happen? Well, at Player Research, we have this very simple 4-layer model to help explain things from a player's perspective. So you want the player to be up here. You want the player to give you money. I'm guessing, right? However, there are a few things in the way before the player will give you money. For example, if the player has a good experience, they're more likely to give you money. Now, nobody would disagree with that. I'm enjoying this game, so I will give them more money to continue playing this game or have a better experience. That's obvious. That's not breaking anything new, saying anything new. So if I have a good game, if I have a good experience, I am more likely to pay. It's not guaranteed, but I'm more likely. So what does a good game mean? Well, there are lots of things that could go into what is a good game. But the next layer down is usability. What that means is, can the player do the things that you want them to do as the game designer? So you've designed the game in such a way that you want the player to do something. Does the player do that? In many cases, the answer is no. Actually, they don't. So why doesn't the player do the things that you want them to do? At our lowest layer, it's understanding. And that basically says, does the player know the basic rules of the game? Do they know what's available? Do they know how things work? Again, the answer is no. And most of the reports, if not all of the reports that we send back to companies, most of the problems are down here. It's saying the player does not understand how to play your game. And even when they understand it sometimes, the player can't actually do it. So if you don't understand something, you can't do it. How could you? If you can't do it, well, you're probably not going to enjoy it. And if you don't enjoy it, well, I'm certainly not going to give you any money. Another way of looking at this, if there are any psychology students in the room, this model is sometimes called the Swiss cheese model, or the model of accident causation. So when helicopters crash, or planes go down, or boats sink, this is the model investigators use to try and explain what happened and what was the source of the problem. For example, this may be a plane crashes. This is the problem. And this is our 4 layers for game experience: understanding, usability, player experience, monetization. And each layer has some holes in it. I'm sorry to say it, but your games are not perfect. Sorry to break that to you. So sometimes, because all of these holes, they all line up. So a problem with the understanding causes a problem with usability, causes a problem with the player experience, the player doesn't pay you, and then you see the problem. So some game designers say to us, oh, our game didn't make any money. We must have got the economy wrong. No. All it means is, this is where you saw the problem. It does not mean that's where your problem started. It just means that's the end result of the problem. People not paying you could be a problem down here that propagates all the way up. And then you see the problem at the end, which is, oh, we didn't get a high enough review score. We didn't get enough downloads. We didn't make enough money. But it doesn't mean that these layers are your problem. Your problem is very often the invisible stuff. You will never see if someone doesn't understand your game. It's invisible. The only thing you actually see is no one likes our game or no one downloads it. I'll try and give you some data on this. This is an anonymized evaluation of 100 games from professional game developers. They belong to one publisher, and the publisher paid us to analyze 100 of their games. So across this axis is the 100 games, and if I take any one column, like this one, there are 9 principles that all games have in common. And it's very common things like tutorial or feedback, controls. So all things that any game would have. A green dot means they're doing okay. It's not bad. A yellow dot means a large number of players will leave your game. It is not good enough. There's a problem with that component of the game. And a red dot means it's very likely all players will leave. It's horrendous. This is seriously flawed design, and players are likely to stop their journey at that point. So, as you can probably realize, it's not a great picture. Look how many red dots. In fact, nearly 3/4 of these games have at least one red dot. And you can see there's a particular highlight here where it was nearly all red dots. So every way we evaluated that game was like awful, 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 terrible, disastrous. And by the way, that was one of the more expensive games in the catalog. So it's not a pretty picture. These are all experienced game developers. And even though we chose really simple metrics to evaluate them, like feedback or UI or tutorial, they were not doing well. So how does this happen? How can experienced game developers routinely make really basic mistakes that offers a terrible experience to the player? Well, that's what we're trying to stop. So let's go back and put some of those scores on, just to show over here. If we look at those 100 games and map it to this very simple model, only about 1/4 of the games would stand a chance of making money. That's only a chance, not saying they will, it's just the opportunity. But it's very likely that the majority of those games, the player would just no way consider giving them money. They're just not good enough. The experience has too many flaws in the design. Too confusing, too difficult. In a bad way, not in a good way either. This is not saying difficulty is bad. It's not, it's a different argument. So the problem is, for these game developers, the majority of players are not making it through these lower layers. Players are simply getting too confused or do not understand what the designer wants them to do. So how do you increase the chances of that? How do we make sure the majority of players get through your game every single time? Well, this is what we do for the game industry. And I'll explain these as quickly as I can. So there are around 10, we actually have a bit more than this, but there's 10 of these. And you'll see they start at the very beginning and they go on until post-launch. So we're user researchers. Our job is to assess and understand how players interact with games. That's what we spend our day doing. Now, most of you will know, maybe you've heard of user research in terms of play testing, the act of putting the player in front of your game to see what they do. Not what they say, we're not so interested in what they say, we're interested in what they do. But play testing is actually quite late. It's in the middle of production sometimes. And we know you can play test prototypes, that's completely fine. But still, look at all the things you could do to make your game better. So the rest of this talk, I'm going to show you each of these steps in a bit of detail in the hope that you can take these away and apply them to your game. Some of them may not be appropriate for you, that's fine, but some of them will definitely help you make your game better. And I hope at least it makes you think about a process for making your game design. How do we make games? It's not about getting people together. You need a way of structuring your feedback. And that was the key thing that Pixar said. We need feedback at all stages of development. Your feedback, in the majority of cases, should come from real players. Not your friends and family, not your fellow classmates, because they're going to be too nice. You need to somehow find objective people who are not involved and just watch what they do with your game. And then you'll start to get better. So this is the idea. Get a process in place that you can apply for every single game. And when you do it, you get better. You get better as a designer because you've learned something. Your game gets better, and players love your game more. There's no real downside to this. It may take up some of your time, but in the long run, it should save you time because you're building things right the first time round. Yes, you should definitely iterate as often as possible, but this should help you know where to iterate or focus your energy. You've only got so much time to make games. So if you can reduce that, then that should be better for you. So this is the 10 things. I'll just go through these very quickly and show you. So the concept test. This starts the moment you have an idea. We're going to make an RPG roguelike. I don't know. Put any genre together. It doesn't matter. That's what we're going to make. We're going to make an endless runner, a match 3, a base builder. Doesn't matter. Whatever you're going to make, that's fine. This is the stage you should start with thinking about user research. So a concept test, as you see, can add a little bit of polish to these 4 layers. It is not perfect. That's why we have 10 methods. So you can't just say, okay, I've done one thing, I'm ready. That will not work for you. Let's have a look and see what we mean. So a concept test, for example, could even be on things like testing your iTunes or App Store preview page. Why would you, out of interest, has anyone tested that? Has anyone got a game on the App Store or Google Play Store? Anyone? A few? Okay. All right. So why it's useful, for example, to mock this up, even before it's final, why you would want to start showing this to people is to ask them, what do you think this game does? We have some clients who report massive drop-offs from people going to the front page of the App Store and downloading it, and then when they play the session once, they leave. I say, wow, they play our game once and never again. Why is that? Why does that happen? We sometimes pay $5 to acquire that user. They played our game for maybe a minute, then they left, and I paid $5 for that? Wow, that's really expensive. If you do that 1 million times, that's not great. So why does that happen? Well, one of the reasons it happens is that what you are promising, either in the pictures or the description, is different than what your game actually does. So some people are promising high action games. It looks like it's a fast-paced action game. But when you download it, it's a turn-based strategy game. That might sound crazy to you, but it happens. What a game displays or promises the player versus the actual experience do not match up. And so what players want is they spend time downloading, they get a different experience. This isn't what you promised me, and they leave. Just tell players what it is. Okay, I'll skip that. The most high profile, perhaps, or most successful concept test was with Candy Crush. Has anyone played? Yeah, of course you've played Candy Crush, okay. So Candy Crush looks like this if you haven't seen it before. I'm sure you have. But it didn't always look like that. In fact, one of the earlier art styles, it was set in a French Art Deco theme. It looked nothing like this. And the soothed voice that sounds over the top was a French accent. And King said it didn't work. It wasn't successful. And when they changed it to the candy theme, by the way, the game was exactly the same. But when they changed it to look like this, it was very successful. So this was a game where the mechanics were identical, but the art style and the voice were different. And that made a difference between a game that nobody wanted to play and a game that sold for $7 billion last year. Massive difference. So if you think a concept test is not important, it is massively important. Sometimes players will love your game, but you may need to change how it looks or sounds. It depends. It's not just the casual audience who does this, or casual game studios. Riot do this, Bungie do this. Lots of studios are concept testing their art long before they make them inside software. For example, in this case, they brought in people and asked them what these weapons did. They asked them, how does this character move? And in some cases, players were saying things like, oh, that's a really powerful weapon because it's got a long barrel or it's thick. And the developer was thinking, actually, it's actually not a very powerful weapon at all. We got that wrong. We misunderstood. So they're evaluating how players are interpreting the look of the characters or look of the weapons before they go into software. Because once it's in software, it's really expensive to change and make. But doing a concept art test is really quick. And if you don't get it right, you throw it in the bin and you do it again. That takes you a few hours. Until when you bring people in, you say, yep, that's the fast character, that's a slow character, that weapon's really expensive, that vehicle moves fast. You want to get evidence that the player is thinking like you before you make it. So, a competitor analysis. Stage 2. A competitor analysis can add, again, a little bit of polish to all 4 layers. You're looking at your competition and saying, why are they successful? We find it amazing that a game can come out, which is a bit like another game, but it's not as good. How can it be not as good? Well, one of the reasons is the designers did not know what made it good in the first place. If you try and copy a game and you've made it less good, then you maybe don't really understand what makes that game good for the player. Yes, you may copy the mechanics, but somehow you've missed something. You've missed the player experience part. There's different ways of doing a competitor analysis, but one of the ways we do it, this is a very simple way. You can take different criteria that apply to the game and assess 2 or 3 different games according to the same checklist. Different companies have different checklists. You can make your own. There are free ones online. You can do it per all games like this. These will apply to any game. Or you can do one per genre. Actually, we're making a roguelike. So our criteria are this. We're making a platformer. We're making a puzzle game. Whatever it is you're doing, you will have criteria that are really important to your game. If you're making a car game, things like the weight of the car will be important, or the feeling of it, or drifting ability. All those sorts of metrics that players care about when they talk about cars. Same with weapons, same with match 3s. They have their own key criteria. As an example, we spent a year, it was a bit too long, looking at 4 base builders. And we wanted to know, why is Clash of Clans at the top, or Boom Beach, or Heyday, or Game of War Farage? And how come Star Wars, which looks really similar to these games and has the Star Wars IP, is over 100 positions further down the charts than, say, Boom Beach? How can that be? How come a company like Disney have used the Star Wars IP to take on the base builder genre, but can get nowhere near Clash of Clans are? Isn't that interesting if you're a game designer or a game developer? You're in one of the world's best IPs and loads of experience making games, and still you cannot compete with other companies. Well, we spent a year and we wrote a 255-page book explaining the first hour of those 4 games, what was good and what was bad. Just to give you an idea of what it looks like. This is 1 page, and we're talking about the feedback whenever you plant a new item. So if you've got a new building, a new wall, or a new turret, or a new store, if you just look at the feedback that each of the games gives you, we explain who does it the best, why they do it the best, are there any flaws even in the best people, how would you do it better? So when we say competitor analysis, it is mind-numbing detail that we go to try and beat the competitor. So if we're working on a game and our client says, we want to be the best match 3. So, okay, well, we better spend some time understanding why King is pretty good, or why Jelly Splash is good, or whoever it may be. But it's the detail that you need, because it's the detail that matters to the player experience. It's not just the broad mechanics. Oh yeah, you can plot a wall there or drop a wall there. It's exactly how you drop a wall. What does the feedback look like? Are more steps better or less steps better? How many touches? How do you cancel? Mind-numbing detail. But if you want to be the best, that's exactly what you're going to have to do. It doesn't matter if it just works. Anybody can make a game that works. But the details is what separates it out. Okay, interaction analysis, I'll go quickly over. This was a 2D shooter game on the iPad called Battle Squadron. And the company who made it announced a few years back that it used to be a 16-bit game on the Commodore Amiga, which I'm sure none of you probably remember. But it was a 16-bit game that was coming to the iPad. And they were very excited about the control scheme. They were going to use Tilt. So a Tilt-based control scheme for a shooter. And they were very excited. So I wrote to them and said, please don't do that. You're about to make a mistake. And I'd prefer it if you didn't do Tilt-based controls. And they said, no, we love our Tilt-based controls. So that's what you're going to get. Anyway, lots of emails went backwards and forwards. I tried to persuade them that they were making a mistake. So in fact, this is the Tilt-based controls. And then 2 other control schemes, these ones here. But what I managed to persuade them was this one top left, direct touch, was a better, more satisfying control scheme. So how do you do that? If you are making games with multiple control schemes, one simple idea that may help you evaluate different control schemes is to just say, list everything the player has to do. So in a 2D shooter, the player has to stand still. You have to avoid bullets. You have to make small movements, pixel precision. You have to make large movements. This ship will go up and collect. This ship may have to go up and collect missiles. You have to change between states, so small movements, large movements, and change of direction. So when you map out everything the player has to do, and you map it against the control method, like Tilt, it turns out Tilt is pretty bad at everything. Tilt is not good at anything the player has to do. So this is a bad control scheme. They implemented a virtual D-pad. Nobody likes virtual D-pads, so we can all agree they are useless. Clearly the worst-based control scheme. They had a touch-based method, which was pretty good, apart from this one. I'll not explain why today. And then we managed to make a suggestion which solved that issue. So if you download this game today, the top left method is the default control scheme. And the thing is, we could have done that on paper. This company designed this game and built 3 different control schemes, none of which were great. And we could have told them that on paper before it was built. So they weren't taking the time to analyze their control scheme in relation to what the player had to do. All they thought was, well, it works, so that's good enough. It's not good enough. Just because they could play it doesn't mean it was interesting or suitable, sorry, I should say. If anybody wants a detailed explanation or another example of twin-stick shooters, so if anyone's making a twin-stick shooter, if you drop me an email, I'll send you a document we wrote for Gamasutra explaining how to design the best possible twin-stick shooter controls. Games being released even today in 2016 are still using really bad methods, which we know don't work. They're not the best. There is a best way of doing it, and this explains why. I'll not explain it today. But if you want one, if you're making that style of game, please write to me. I'll send you that. So I'll try and get through these a bit quicker. Collaborative UI design is very good for catching these low-end issues. How you could do it is give your colleagues your design early on and let them critique it. But you need a set checklist. You have to agree what's important. For example, this is a game called War for the Overworld, which was Steam greenlit. It's now released. It's a successor to Dungeon Keeper. So EA had the official Dungeon Keeper on mobile. These guys have the PC, the Steam version. It's not branded Dungeon Keeper, but it's essentially the same game. And really early in development, they brought in their design. And this is the game director, Josh. And this is 2 of our staff, Ben and Seb. And they're critiquing Josh's ideas at the paper stage. So Josh is saying, here's how I plan what players will do. Here's how I plan the UI. Here's how you will create a room. And our guys are saying, okay, if you want the player to do that, here are all the mistakes you're about to make. And we spent 2 days just going through every one of his ideas, saying whether it was good or bad or could be improved. The full experience is written up on a blog. So if you blog War for the Overworld, or if you Google War for the Overworld and player research, you'll see what Josh wrote as a result of those 2 days. You'll see what changed and why it changed as well. So again, this is very cheap, very fast. But the important part is, this is like Pixar. He is the game director. He knows exactly how his game is going to be played. What he doesn't see is all the flaws, because he sees the game as he wants. So these guys are testing all Josh's assumptions. You think the player will do this. You think the player will like this. I'm going to challenge all your assumptions and reveal all the weaknesses. And by the way, that's torturous, that's bad, but then we'll fix them. And your game just gets a lot better. So it's a little bit of bad feeling because you have to go through it, but at the end, you get an amazingly good feeling, which is no player will ever see my bad design. Isn't that amazing? All those mistakes, no player will ever see them because they've been caught during the process. And that's what Pixar do as well. Pixar have only made one film that we will never see. They cancelled it. No one's ever seen it. And they consider that a success. Because if we had seen that movie and went, oh yeah, that's the rubbish one that they made, that would ruin their reputation. Nobody ever says Pixar made that rubbish movie, apart from Cars 2 maybe, but you know. But they did a pretty good job of making consistent hits. And if we had seen that movie they cancelled, wow, that's not a good thing. So it is successful to cancel your bad games. It's better for you. As long as you learn from it, of course. Expert evaluation, I've kind of talked about. It's getting these checklists and going through in a methodical way. Again, catching ideas early. That's the whole point of these. Some people call them heuristic lists. They come with different names. But essentially, it's a checklist to make you stop and think and go through your game. How is the feedback on your game? How is your control scheme? How is your tutorial? How is your UI? Ask yourself these really basic questions because you're so busy caught up in your game's design and the bigger scheme that sometimes you don't stop to think about the player. Are they really going to be caught up anywhere? Am I doing everything I can to make sure they play the game the way I play it? Playtesting you almost certainly know about. It's the most popular method in user research. But look how many other chances we've already talked about to polish your game before we've got to talk about playtesting. The reason why this is important is, say you said, for example, oh yeah, we playtest our game. Maybe you do. I'm very pleased for you. That makes me happy and fuzzy. That's good. However, if you playtest your game with flaws in it already, then whenever it comes to asking the player or surveying the player about how they feel about your game, they may say they don't like it. And that can make you feel bad. However, that may not be the truth. The reason why we do all this stuff before playtesting is to get rid of all the usability issues and the understanding issues. The reason you use real humans is because they can talk about the experience. They shouldn't be talking about usability issues or understanding issues. We want to fix all of those so that when the player gets it, it's as close to your design intent as possible. We don't want to use the players really to catch basic usability mistakes. It's a waste of their time. Yes, you can do it, and it will catch some, but it's not what they're best at. You should be using players really to see if they're, well, first of all, their behavior. Are they playing the game the way you want? And secondly, are they experiencing the game the way you want? So when they talk about your game afterwards, are they saying the things you would want them to say? For example, the next time you play test and you're about to interview the player at the end, before you do that, think to yourself, what do I want this player to say about my game? And only make the list about 3 things long. They should be saying this, this, and this. And if they don't mention those 3 things, man, I've failed. Because they're the 3 things, they're the 3 reasons why you play my game. And if they're not talking about it, that's a bad thing. The other thing, of course, is watching their behavior. Did they do it? If you said, I've got this new thing, this new feature in my game is the best feature ever. Watch people during the playtest. Do they use it? Are they using it correctly? And then at the end, make sure they talk about it. Because if they used it and they didn't mention it, well, why is that? Maybe they used it and it sucks. Or maybe they used it and just forgot about it or didn't think it was interesting. So you're interested in this difference between what players do, which is by far the most important, by the way, and finally what they say, just to validate that when they did it, that it was satisfactory. Sometimes players do something not knowingly, so you can't say they did it, that they enjoyed it. We've seen some game designers, for example, say things like, oh yeah, they used that weapon, that means they enjoy it. No, it just means they used it. You cannot make the leap and say, and they enjoyed it. That's a whole different world. So again, be very careful of what you infer from watching players. So yes, play testing is important. This is one of our playrooms. This is Dota 2. And this is the observation room. So this chap, who's one of our staff actually, is playing in a separate room on his own. And then in another room, we're watching him play remotely to understand his behavior. What is he doing? Why is he doing that? Is he playing it correctly? Where's the confusion? Why isn't he doing what we wanted him to do? In some cases, you've got multiplayer. So this is 12 players playing at once. We can watch all 12 players. And this is very useful if you want to know the experience of a game. So if you're watching one player, just go back, these one-on-one sessions are very good for usability. If you want to know, are there any issues with account creation or changing weapons or character configuration, one-on-one is the best way to do it. Just watch one person at a time. However, that won't tell you very much about the experience of your game. If you want to know how people feel about your game, that's different. You need large numbers. We use at least 36 people, sometimes 72. They play 12 at a time, and when they play after 12 people, they get a survey. And then at the end of the session, we take all the results and try and get a feeling for what did people like or not like. Just to give you an example, this is one of our playtest reports. We always have 2 people watching, and they need to agree or at least discuss. And you can see we talk about good practice as well. Sometimes game designers do something which is great and they don't even know it. It's a pure accident. Wow, that just happened to be good practice. So try and point out what's good or bad. And when you play test each other's games, as I'm sure you might, try to do it in pairs or groups and jot down good or bad and compare your notes. They should be quite consistent. Don't put your own opinion into it. Try to stick to the facts. So don't say, I think that. That's probably not useful. Stick to the facts. What actually happened? Don't say, for example, the player experienced difficulty, because that's too subjective. Explain what you mean by difficulty. The player tried to configure the character 3 times. Okay, that's the facts. Now, that may be difficult, or maybe they were just trying something out. So again, try to remove opinion and interpretation from your notes. That is not helpful. Be as accurate and objective as possible. No one should be able to disagree with it. And then you can discuss at the end. We're getting near the end, as you see, near the end of game development. A digital diary is different from any other method because we're trying to understand how someone plays your game over maybe a week or a month. Not just one session, like half an hour or an hour. How does someone live with your game for a month? So running a diary study, which you may or may not do, you can ask simple questions. For example, rate the game in terms of fun or difficulty. Like lots of people do this. You could do it using metrics even. And it's not that interesting. It's okay. It'll reveal some things. But what's much more interesting is to ask the player why. How do you feel on day one? So when we do a diary study, we give the player a game, they live with it for 1 or 2 weeks, and they're told every time you play the game, fill out this Google sheet. So it's a Google spreadsheet that we design, and it asks them certain questions. And those results come through automatically, of course. So this is a real game, MMX Racing by Hutch. It was featured on the Google Play Store a few weeks ago and iOS Store. So you can see for this game, it starts off actually quite negative. The player's saying this could get boring. Not sure about longevity. So lots of bad experiences in the first few days. And then around day 6, the player starts to change. And you're like, oh, I see. I see where this game is going. So what you can start to do is, if the player's not seeing what's cool about it until day 6, we can start to bring some of this experience forward so that the player sees it in the first few sessions. So we're looking for an understanding of to why. So metrics will tell you where you have a problem, players are dropping off, but they will never tell you why they have a problem. And that's why the digital diary exists. It tells you why. Because as game designers, that's the part you need the most. What is driving this experience? The number is not the most meaningful. It'll tell you where. But to fix the problem, you need to know the underlying cause of the problem. Oh, I see. That's what's going wrong. We can fix that. As an example, this is real data from MMX Racing. These are the 60-day LTV curves, lifetime value. When the game launched, the numbers were good, but the company thought they could be better. So they changed 3 things to make the game better. 1, they added lots more content, lots of more stuff. Secondly, they redesigned the tutorial as a result of a playtest. The third thing, they rebalanced the in-game economy. So my question to you is, which one do you think added more revenues to the bottom line for this company? Okay. So, if you said tutorial redesign, pat yourself in the back, well done. That was the top answer. It gave them a 30% increase in LTV, by far the biggest. The reason was that the players were dropping off or having an issue during the tutorial, but they didn't know why. We play tested, we saw people experience the exact problem, we fixed the problem, made a suggestion, and then that resulted in 30% increase to the amount of money they made in that period. So this was a case where metrics told them they had a problem, but they had no idea why it was a problem. That's why you had to play test or use another method to identify why. And once you know why, then you make the fix. Just for your own curiosity, adding content added 14% to the bottom line. The tutorial redesign was 30, and rebalancing the economy was the least at 9. Still good though. We got a good increase between all 3. We're at the end pretty much. We're in this launch phase where you get analytics, and I've showed that as well. Just a final, I mean, you're very familiar with Supercell, I'm sure, in this part of the world. When they talk about making a great game, they really talk about retention and engagement before marketing. So they're saying you have to make sure you get a great game first, and then you pour in the user acquisition budget. Otherwise, you're just wasting it. And this sounds really obvious, but you wouldn't believe how many companies do not do that. They do not polish their experience. They do not polish everything I've talked about, the process. What they hope is just buying user acquisition gets them enough people to make money. But almost, it does not happen like that. They buy users to come in, and then they bounce off because they can't get through these lower layers. Both last year, the Google Play Store and Apple's App Store, both of them changed to focus on the player experience. Apple hired curators to hand-pick the best games for the year to show you what was the best experience. And Google changed its algorithm. And what Google's algorithm does, it looks for signs of retention. So which games are being played the longest with most repeat visits, and then they feature those games. So Apple uses humans to identify the good games, and Google uses algorithms to identify the good games. But they both have a similar approach. They're looking for games that they think you will play for a long time. There's enough depth and engagement and retention there. And of course, Pixar do the same sort of thing. This process I've outlined helps you with engagement and retention and all those issues that help get players to where you think they should be. We're at the end. Thanks very much. Thank you. So I know there's a lot of talking there. Sorry about that. Does anyone get any questions on any aspect of that, or even things not related to that? I don't know.
Yeah, so thanks for the great talk. I saw your keynote at KaiPlay, and it was really nice to get a bit longer view of what your company is doing. And so if I may start the questions myself. So can you tell more about the 9 guidelines or heuristics you were using on that 100-game grid? Is that some academic battery of questions, or is that available somewhere, or is it your proprietary instrument?
Yeah, in that case, they belong to a client who hired us. But I can tell you how we did it. This is a few years ago. We had 5 different methods, approaches to inform those heuristic set. I may forget some, by the way. But we brought in real people to watch them play their games, the clients' games. So we watched people struggle. So that was one thing, real players. We looked at the academic literature on heuristic sets, and there's many heuristic sets. I'm sure you're aware. We brought in a professional game reviewer to see how he would assess games. And there were two more that I've completely forgotten. But what are the other two, actually? I might have to get back to you on that. But there were 5 inputs that we used anyway to help inform how do you assess games? What are the common characteristics of all games? The final one was the player one, I think. So we looked at we made a best guess, then we brought players in to validate the list, and we started off with 20 things, and some of them were not suitable, and we got down to 15, and then in the end it went down to 10, 9 or 10, I think.
Okay. If you think of the kind of academic published heuristics sets and so on, what would you recommend for people? Which article to read if there was only one?
So I don't know if some of the, okay, I'm going to criticize a few of them first, if that's okay. Some of them are very long. So you're all, well, you're students as well. So anyway, it depends who you are, right? If you're a PhD student in this area, knock yourself out. There are some really long-winded ones that will keep you excited for weeks on end. But if you're a game practitioner, if you're somebody who wants to make a game better, when we speak to designers were another factor in my heuristic set. When you speak to designers, they want something short and usable. So there are some heuristic sets with over 100 elements in it, and they're very detailed, but when we show them to a game designer, they say, I would never use this. It takes too long to find the problem. So they're more interested in something short and usable, which is why we have 9, actually with 10. I said 9 here, there's one missing that I can't show. Yeah, whatever. So we had a list of 10 things, and designers said that was the most interesting space between memorable, something they can put into memory, and usable and useful. They wanted kind of all three. Okay. Some that spring to mind, HEP, H-E-P, as a heuristic set, and Play, P-L-A-Y. Some of them look at tutorial game, heuristics for tutorials, and some look at just the broader experience as well.
Okay,
yeah.
Thanks. Any other questions?
So you all know how to make consistent games. You'll all be multimillionaires next year, I presume.
Hello.
Hello.
You said you're kind of like within the game design process from the start, and for example, you gave the example with the twin stick shooter thing, and I was kind of thinking, like, isn't that kind of like looking out the idea that you could actually make a shooter game with kind of tilt controls that actually work? Like, you'd think it's not possible, like most people have not done it, but do you kind of think it's impossible?
It is actually one of the best tilt games is a kind of shooting game as well. But the thing is, it's factored into the design. So they took the tilt control scheme and built the game around that, where this company did it the other way around. They already had a 2D shooter, and they tried to put tilt into it, and that was not the way to do it. The game design did not make use of tilt controls. So if you started with tilt and then said, well, what's an interesting shooter game with tilt? That's the way to do it. So you definitely could do that, but your game design has to reflect the controls. And this company flipped it, sadly. So,
I see.
yeah.
Thanks.
Anyone else?
Hi.
Hey.
Do you use any physiological measurements of, let's say, player emotions, or do you track emotions from the facial expressions or something like that?
We've tried all that stuff. In fact, we've published on that as well in the past when I was an academic. My PhD student was in physiological experiments for games. Yeah, we don't do it anymore, I'll say that. So it's very ambiguous. It's been interesting, but it's not necessarily useful. So in the commercial world, it takes more time and it's more expensive. and slower, and it's not revealing the top issues. So there's so many other things you can get with normal methods that are more useful for you, that it's so far down the list we never would get to it. But it's certainly interesting, and that's why we did it as academics, because we didn't have to worry about making money, or making a game better for that matter. But it certainly revealed things. Yeah, I have a call next week with a facial tracking company, so we still talk to people like that, but we don't use it much anymore. The only physiological measurements we have used recently is eye tracking, and that's because the design question from the game studio was very specific, and the only way to answer it was eye tracking. None of these methods would have revealed the answer. You had to do it that way. So it always comes back to what do you want to know? You know, and the thing is, most game designers do want to know, is my game fun? You know, that's the most obvious question. But before you get to fun, that's why we start with these lower questions, because there's barriers to fun, which is the understanding, the usability, and then the player experience. In an ideal world, we would use these cheap methods to focus on understanding and usability and fix them, and then maybe your physiological measurements would come in at player experience. But you need to be sure you've gotten rid of all the easy stuff. That's the time to do it. Yeah. I think in the future it could get more common, let's say. I think maybe we're a bit ahead of the curve. Maybe the world's not ready for mass market physiological measurements. But one last thing on that. I know Nintendo tried to make a sensor. I don't know if you read this. Around the time of the Wii, they tried to make a physiological sensor, and they abandoned that idea. And they said because it doesn't work on everyone. So not everyone reacted to the equipment. That's the same for any GSR or any of those physiological. Well, not any, heart rate works for everyone. but for GSR, for example, it's about 90% of people it'll work for, and 10% it will not. So, yeah, that's a problem too. Thanks.
So, how do you acquire good test subjects? And do you have any suggestions for how we, who can probably not pay extensive money to get good test subjects and people to ask for feedback on design elements and so on? Do you have any tips for that?
Oh. So we have our own database, and it took us 7 years to make it. It is unbelievably painful. Of all the things I could say that is the most difficult, it's probably that. Because it's easy to get anyone to play your game. And game designers we speak to play test at events, conferences, but they're not the right people. So the feedback you get are not necessarily helpful or true. So they may not be making their game better. In terms of tips, I really don't know. It's super difficult. I know when we recruit, so we have our own database, and we go through a 2-stage process as well. So we send you an email to our whole database that says, hey, we're play testing a racing game next Thursday. And people reply, and we always try and put a few trick questions in there. Like say we're after different styles of racing games. Some are maybe fun and bubbly like Mario Kart, and maybe some are serious, like maybe Gran Turismo or something. So we put different styles in to start filtering out people. We don't want Gran Turismo, we want Mario Kart people. But we never just say we want Mario Kart people, because everyone says, well, I'll play for £10 or €10, So you have to catch out the people who just want to play to get €10. We pay €40 for an hour, which is not bad if you want to come in and play a new game. If you're in Brighton next week and you want some, no, I'm joking. So we pay quite a lot of money for 1 hour of your time to come in and play a game. So the downside is people will turn up. So we need to make sure they're not the people we want. So your form has to be very carefully designed to get the people you want and weed out the people you do not want in a nice way. The second thing we do, if you get through that, we phone you up. So the people who meet Mario Kart or whatever it is, we phone you up, and if you've said, for example, I've played every Mario game ever, every Mario Kart game, we'll phone you up and talk to you to make sure you're not lying to us. Because again, people will say anything on a forum. So it's even worse than you think. It's much harder. You think it's hard to find people. You then have to make sure they're not lying to you. And that takes so much time. And it's so hard to do. Our last employee was not a researcher, it was a participant coordinator. And her only job is to find the right people for us. That's how difficult it is. I haven't answered your question at all. I've just told you how hard it is.
Right.
I don't know how you will find unbiased people. When I was at university and at a company in the university, we did use students. So yeah, you might just, I don't know how to do it without paying. We did pay a small amount. Without is tough. I don't know. Sorry, I failed in your question.
Yeah, but did you have, okay, so that's obviously hard. Did you have any tips for getting feedback throughout your design process from others than the players?
So some companies do use other game designers. You're lucky, you're in a room full of other people. You could ask other people for feedback. Again, this heuristic list, although it looks really simple, if you give your game design and that list to other game designers and ask them to comment just on those areas, that may really help you. Because sometimes people look at it and they see what they want to see. Like they'll focus on the cool bit or the bit that's obviously broken or whatever it is. So at least if you make a list and say, no, I want feedback on all these areas, controls and UI and tutorial and the core game loop or the monetization or the store usability, or if you just make a list of 10 things and force them to go through it, then that could really, it'll force them to look at every bit, and that could help you. So that may help. And if you do that every week, what you should see is the feedback gets better and better. So whenever you design your game, jot down all the things that are important to you. These are the things that make our game awesome. And you should be asking for feedback in those too. If it starts off like it sucks or whatever, then you should see over time as you fix it, then things getting better. So you could have some general things, just called core to all games, like this list I showed, and then some specific ones, specific to your game. Yeah, that could possibly help people be objective, which is what you're after.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Hello. In your experience, how long does the research take about, or what has been your shortest or longest time?
Most things we do are 2 days.
Okay.
So, and that includes for all these largest companies like EA or whoever. Some are maybe 2 or 3 days, and some last maybe a week, but most are 2 or 3 days, I would say. For example, a play test with 6 people, we work on a 3-day cycle. So the first day is preparation, where we design, our researchers play the game to get familiar. They make out the sheet, the questionnaire, for example, they test the build. The second day, the players come in one at a time, usually, for 1 hour each, about 40 minutes of play, 20 minutes of interview-ish. That takes 1 day, and 2 researchers, always 2, take notes. On the third day, they take all the notes and write that up into a report, which is about 30 to 50 pages long. Each page has mostly one issue. At the top, it's the severity. How important is this finding? Like high priority. A description of the problem, a screenshot. Some suggestions how to fix it. So try and do 1 issue per page, just because it makes it easy to get into that format of what is the issue, how severe is it, a screenshot so everyone agrees this is the problem. The longest thing we do is maybe the diary study, because it goes on for a month. But we're not sitting there for a month. We just it goes on in the background, but that's quite rare. So speed is of the essence. As you know, game development, things change a lot. So we prefer to do lots of cycles, but really, really short.
Okay. Yeah. How many cycles do you do usually then?
Depends how much money they have. A lot of our clients may only can afford 1. That's why our reports are so long, because we may never see them again. So we try and put in as much information as possible. The most may not even be that much, 5 or 6, maybe. Yeah, it's quite short.
Hi, I'm really interested in the using the tilt for shooting games as well. Can you name?
Wow, that's so popular.
Can you name a few games? You mentioned that there are a few good games out there that using tilt for control.
Tilt to Win is definitely worth looking at.
Sorry.
Tilt to Win.
Tilt control. Tilt to Win.
Tilt to Win's the game.
Okay.
Yeah, it's maybe one of the best best games, I think. In terms of a car game, I think it was Need for Speed: The Run, which used controls and it was very successful, I thought, as well. So it used the accelerometer to control the car. It was very good. Whereas tilt to win, you had to hold it horizontal. It was a different style of game.
Yeah, but is there any good game that used the tilt for like the shooting game? That used tilt.
I think that first one, is it shooting? The first? Can't think of any. Tilt to win may shoot. It's been a while since I played it, or it may just be avoiding. Has anyone played it? No, maybe not. I can't think of anything offhand, oddly enough. Tilting and shooting that's good. No. There may be a reason for that. I don't know. Have you got your game with you, by the way?
No, I have the design, but I've never been able to develop it. Yeah.
I was keen to play it. I can't think of any offhand, but no, sorry.
Right.
No good tilting and shooting games. There's a niche, okay.
Okay, so good chance for me then.
Yes, exactly. I like that, yeah. I think it could be done. I do.
Yeah, hello.
Hello.
I have a question. Do you have some principles to make the best of combining player research and analytics that you get from post-launch?
Yeah.
Because the first one is very good in pinpointing very exact things, while the other one, by definition, is very, very messy.
Which is which?
The messy one is big data.
Okay,
It's when you
just
have a
checking.
million daily active users
Yeah.
that shows patterns, but it doesn't show exact things.
So one of the recommendations we give to game developers is we play test really early in development sometimes, and we see what's wrong because our reports say these are the things that are wrong with your game, or good for that matter. What we advise developers, if they can, is to start putting metrics in around those points in the report. So if we know, for example, that a certain game mechanic is a problem, but we can't prove it on a bigger scale, say we've seen it with 3 or 4 people, and we think it could be a problem, we do encourage our clients to make sure their metrics capture that thing so we can see that proven out later on. So instead of them just guessing what could be important in their game, which they tend to do because they think metrics are easy and, as you say, they record too much, we prefer they record the most interesting parts of the game. So use playtesting early to understand where the problems may be and capture those metrics. That's a good use of using both together, I think, instead of just saying record everything in the game, which is a bit messy. So, yeah. All right.
Maybe it's time to thank Graham. So,
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
thanks a lot, Graham, for coming. Am I online? Can you hear me? At least you can. All right. So just still as a reminder, as it's kind of a special thing next time. So it's in 3 weeks, the last Games Now session of this academic year, and then there's the Aalto in the Game recruitment event before, which I believe starts around noon. So you can come around already around 12 to hang out, play student games, and meet the companies who are recruiting. And then we'll have the lecture starting at 3 here as normal. But thanks a lot for you. Thanks a lot for those who are watching the stream. And I'll see you in 3 weeks. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.